Imagine looking at a sinking ship, right? And deciding that, well, the problem isn't the hole in the hull. The problem is the actual concept of boats entirely.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
just total rejection of the premise.
Exactly. You just decide the only logical solution is to let the ship sink, walk straight into the ocean, and demand that humanity simply learn how to breathe underwater.
I mean, that is a wildly massive leap.
It is, but that is the exact level of foundational disruption we're exploring today. Welcome to another deep dive, where we are unpacking a highly provocative, deeply philosophical manifesto from a writer named Xu Feng.
Right, from back in 2015.
Yeah, 2015. It's titled Envisioning the Reconstruction of Human Values and Production Life Order.
And it is just a staggering piece of theoretical architecture. I mean, translated by Qin Yu, it doesn't ask us to merely, tweak economic policies or adjust tax brackets.
Definitely not.
No, it demands we completely dismantle the human condition, like from our most intimate private relationships all the way up to the highest echelons of global geopolitics,
Yeah.
and then just rebuild it from scratch.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission today is to examine the sheer mechanical logic of this radical blueprint.
Right.
And just to be clear up front, as we map out this thought experiment, the author does use some highly polarizing real-world political figures to illustrate their theory.
Very specific names, yeah.
Yeah, names that are guaranteed to raise some eyebrows. So I just want to emphasize that we are looking at this purely as a neutral theoretical exercise.
Just to see how the author's logic operates.
Exactly. We aren't taking any political sides here, and we certainly aren't endorsing the text. We just want to explore the theory.
Which is really the only way to genuinely analyze a utopian text like this.
Uh-huh.
You have to temporarily step inside its reality.
You kind of have to suspend your disbelief.
Right, to understand how the author constructs the foundation.
Yeah.
Because, only then can you see why they believe the extreme walls they're building are actually necessary.
Well, if we are examining the foundation, we really have to start with the author's core diagnosis of humanity. Like, why does Xu Feng believe we need to evolve to breathe underwater, so to speak?
Yeah, what's the underlying disease?
Yeah. And the author just comes out swinging in the opening lines. They claim that the entire history of human society has been, quote, a tale of suffering and tears.
A very heavy start.
Extremely. They assert that 95% of all people, past and present, have experienced distress, pain, sorrow, anxiety, and fear.
What's fascinating here is the deliberate pathologizing of standard human emotion.
Wait, what do you mean by pathologizing?
Well, throughout evolutionary biology and classical philosophy, emotions like anxiety and sorrow are recognized as vital survival mechanisms.
Oh, sure. Like, anxiety kept our ancestors from being eaten by predators.
Exactly. And sorrow binds communities together through shared empathy. But, Xu Feng completely strips away that biological context.
So they aren't treating those emotions as normal.
Not at all. The author frames these emotions not as natural features of the human experience, but as catastrophic systemic failures.
See, I really struggle to accept the sheer magnitude of that 95% figure as a literal metric.
It is a massive number.
Right. I mean, if you have a smartphone that drops calls 95% of the time, you don't just update the software.
No, you throw out the phone.
Exactly. You conclude the hardware is defective. But applying that mechanical logic to human psychology just feels like a massive leap to me. Is the author genuinely suggesting that because we feel fear, our entire societal structure is just invalid?
That is the exact philosophical crowbar the author is using to pry up the floorboards of society.
Oh, wow. A crowbar.
Yeah, it's a brilliant, if, extreme rhetorical device. By taking universal human emotions, distress, anxiety, sorrow, and attributing them entirely to the, quote, order of production and life, they manufacture a mandate for total demolition.
So if you convince people that their natural pain is actually artificial.
Right, if it's artificial suffering imposed by a broken system,
Yeah.
you instantly delegitimize thousands of years of human tradition.
That's wild. It weaponizes our own biology against the systems we've built.
It really does.
Because if the foundational premise is that our current way of living is basically a 95% fatal disease to human happiness, then any cure suddenly seems justified.
No matter how radical, precisely. And, that diagnosis is strictly necessary to justify the extreme prescriptions that follow.
You need a big problem to sell a big solution.
Exactly. The author is establishing this rigid binary. Basically, you can either keep the current systems and accept a 95% misery rate, or you can surrender to a total societal reset and achieve unprecedented peace.
Okay, so if this systemic failure is responsible for 95% of human misery, where exactly does the author locate the primary source of that pain?
Well, you'd think it would be something massive.
Right? Like corrupt governments or, I don't know, massive financial institutions. But here's where it gets really interesting because the author bypasses those huge, faceless institutions entirely.
They do?
And they point the finger straight at your living room.
Yeah, the transition from a macro-historical diagnosis to a microscopic sociological prescription is honestly jarring.
It's a total pivot.
It is. The author actually identifies the traditional model of marriage and family life as a, quote, breeding ground for selfishness and troubles, and demands it be completely replaced.
Okay, wait. So my instinct to protect my kids or, my loyalty to my partner over some random stranger on the street, that is actually the root cause of global dysfunction.
So according to this text, yes.
But that directly contradicts the way nearly every human culture operates.
It contradicts our culture, sure, but it perfectly aligns with the mechanical logic of collectivist utopian theory.
How so?
Well, think about the sociological function of the nuclear family. It inherently creates a boundary. It establishes an us and a them. A parent will naturally hoard resources, right? Like time, money, food.
Yeah, for their own child.
Exactly. Rather than distributing those resources equally among the wider community.
Because we are biologically wired for kin selection. I mean, we prioritize the survival of our own genetic line.
Exactly. But to a utopian theorist who's focused on absolute global equality, that biological loyalty is the very definition of selfishness.
So loving your family is selfish because you're excluding everyone else.
Right. The family unit basically fractures the global collective into millions of competing self-interested micro-factions.
Wow.
And this isn't totally new. In many radical blueprints throughout history, from Plato's Republic to various 19th century communes, the family is always targeted.
Because it competes with the state.
Exactly. It is the ultimate rival to the state. Your deepest loyalties lie with your kin, not the collective.
So the author essentially argues that we cannot achieve world peace because people care too much about their own anniversaries and their kids' college funds.
That's the premise.
But get this. The attack on the private sphere doesn't stop at marriage. Point 2 of this blueprint demands that all global affairs, right down to small social groups, must be entirely transparent.
Meaning suppressing any secretive activities whatsoever.
Total, absolute transparency forced onto the microscopic level of human interaction. I'm just trying to mentally model what that actually looks like, and honestly, the psychological mechanics are terrifying.
Oh, it's intense.
Because it isn't just about, not having curtains on your windows. If every thought, every private conversation, every small social gathering is open for public consumption, how does a human ego survive that?
It's funny you asked that. The sociologist Irving Goffman wrote extensively about this kind of thing. He had this concept of the front stage and the backstage of human behavior.
Oh, I've heard of this, like a theater.
Yeah, exactly like a theater. So the front stage is how we perform for society. You're professional, you're polite, you adhere to all the norms.
You're on your best behavior.
Right. But the backstage is where you retreat to drop the act.
Ah, okay.
It's where you process your anxieties and basically cultivate your actual identity away from the gaze of others.
Right. You need the backstage to stay sane. Because if you are always on the front stage, you are literally always performing.
Always. And that is the unspoken mechanism of Schuething's transparency rule. If you remove the backstage entirely, you eradicate the individual ego.
Because you can never just be yourself.
Exactly. The author isn't just trying to stop secret political meetings, They are trying to dissolve the boundaries of the self.
That is so heavy.
Think about it. By eliminating the family unit, you remove private loyalties. And by enforcing absolute transparency, you remove private identity.
You're trading the complex, messy individual for a frictionless component of the collective?
Perfectly said. You become a perfectly interchangeable part of the machine.
But the trade-off is staggering. The author is proposing this wild societal contract. Surrender your personal privacy, abandon your exclusive romantic bonds, give up your family, and in return, the collective will cure the 95% misery rate.
That's the deal on the table.
But if you dissolve the family and erase all private social groups, you are left with this massive amorphous population of totally transparent individuals. How do you possibly organize and manage that on a global scale?
Well, you have to scale the mechanics of control all the way up to the geopolitical level.
Right, because someone still has to manage the supply chains and the infrastructure. We can't just all sit around being transparent.
No, the trash. still needs to be collected.
So, point 3 of the text provides the author's solution for global governance. And the mechanics here are just wild.
They really are.
The author dictates that regional administrative officials should be appointed directly by the United Nations, completely bypassing any kind of local election.
Right, a purely top-down appointment system.
And the examples they provide to illustrate this are mind-bending. They suggest Vladimir Putin should be appointed to govern North America,
Yeah.
Barack Obama appointed to the Middle East, and Xi Jinping assigned to the European Union.
I mean, it is easily the most functionally radical paragraph in the whole text.
It's bonkers.
It advocates for the deliberate geographical and cultural displacement of global power.
Okay, but I have to challenge the basic workability of this. Like, let's use a foreign exchange student analogy, but applied to nuclear-armed superpowers.
Okay, let's hear it.
It's like taking the CEO of a deep-sea mining company and making them the head surgeon of a hospital, just to ensure they don't play favorites with the patients.
Right.
I mean, the lack of bias doesn't make up for the absolute lack of specialized local knowledge. If you place a leader in a region where they don't speak the language, they don't understand the history, and they have zero cultural context, isn't that a mathematical guarantee for an immediate rebellion?
It seems like it on the surface.
Yeah.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to look past the visceral shock of those specific names.
Okay, look past the names.
Yeah, and analyze the underlying mechanism the author's trying to trigger. Think about why local representation is so deeply valued in democratic societies in the first place.
Well, because it aligns incentives. A local leader understands the specific needs of their community and advocates for them against competing interests.
Precisely. A leader's power traditionally derives from their alignment with a specific national identity, a specific cultural in-group.
Their job is to put their people first.
Their mandate is to prioritize their nation above all others. But what happens when you intentionally sever that incentive structure? If you take a powerful leader and force them to govern a region that is completely foreign to them via a top-down mandate from a global body, you strip them of their native constituency.
They no longer have a historical in-group to favor.
Exactly.
So if an American president is forced to govern the Middle East, they can't enact American nationalist policies there, but they also don't have deep-seated local tribal loyalties to exploit.
The author is theoretically trying to manufacture universal empathy by destroying the mechanics of nationalism.
Wow. By making leaders foreigners to their own constituents, you literally make tribalism impossible.
Right. The leader can no longer rely on populist local rhetoric to maintain power. They are forced to become a purely objective administrator for the entire human collective.
I mean, it is an incredibly consistent philosophical equation. At the micro level, you abolish the family to eradicate selfish loyalties. At the macro level, you abolish local elections and native leadership to eradicate nationalist loyalties.
It's very systematic.
You are systematically dismantling every single structure that allows humans to favor one group over another.
It is mathematically elegant on paper, but it completely ignores the messy, volatile reality of human psychology.
Just a bit.
It assumes that people will simply accept being governed by a foreign administrator just because a global committee tells them it is mathematically logical.
Which brings us to the ultimate friction point of this entire blueprint. I am sure you, listening to this right now, are practically shouting at your device, how on earth does the author plan to actually execute this?
Yeah, the logistics of it.
You don't just wake up on a Tuesday, declare families illegal, mandate total transparency, and shuffle the world's nuclear-armed leaders like a deck of cards without triggering absolute chaos.
The mechanism of implementation is the Achilles heel of almost every utopian vision out there.
How to get from point A to point B.
Right. The transition from the flawed present to the perfect future is always the hardest part to explain.
So what does this all mean for the execution phase? Well, the author takes a sudden pivot away from structural logistics and relies heavily on the philosophical.
Very heavily.
The text states that humanity requires, quote, extraordinary and unconventional thinking to allow the divine to open possibilities for world peace.
It is a profound shift from the mechanical to the almost mystical.
It reminds me of a tech founder pitching a revolutionary new app to investors. Like, they promise it will cure all diseases, solve world hunger, and guarantee perpetual happiness.
Just give us the funding.
Right. But when you finally ask to see the underlying code, the actual mechanics of how it works, they just smile and say, don't worry, human wisdom is sufficient.
It's a hand wave.
A total hand wave. The author literally asks a rhetorical question in the text. Is it challenging? And astonishingly, they answer, not really.
The boundless optimism is just staggering.
The author insists that human wisdom is more than enough to overcome these hurdles. And they conclude by stating they already have a, quote, concrete plan that will result in a well-organized transition rather than global chaos.
But they don't share the plan.
They refuse to detail the actual mechanics of that concrete plan in this excerpt. I simply cannot buy the premise.
It's a lot to take on faith.
It cannot dismantle the foundational pillars of human biology, psychology, and geopolitical power in a well-organized transition. It just feels profoundly naive.
This raises an important question about the inherent paradox within utopian literature in general. There's always a fascinating contradiction between how the author views human history and how they view human potential.
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. The author claims human history is a massive failure, right? Producing a 95% misery rate.
Yeah, we're inherently selfish, tribal, constantly generating distress.
Yet simultaneously, the author believes this exact same species, the ones supposedly responsible for thousands of years of endless tears, currently possesses, quote, more than enough innate wisdom to flawlessly execute a peaceful, highly organized global overhaul.
An overhaul that violates every biological instinct we have ever developed.
Exactly.
So we are apparently broken enough to be completely miserable, but perfectly wise enough to build a flawless utopia without spilling a drop of blood.
It requires a tremendous leap of faith.
It really does.
Yeah.
The author relies on the assumption that unconventional thinking acts like a magic spell.
Right.
That once the sheer logic of this transparent, family-free, globally managed system is presented, humanity's dormant wisdom will just awaken, and we will all voluntarily walk into the ocean and start breathing underwater.
It relies on the belief in a spontaneous paradigm shift. The assumption is that our suffering is entirely structural,
Okay.
and therefore, if the structures are dissolved, human resistance will just dissolve along with them.
That is a staggering amount of theoretical weight to place on an unseen, concrete plan.
It certainly is.
And it really brings into focus the sheer, breathtaking scope of Shuofeng's 2015 manifesto. I mean, let's just recap where we've been. We began with a diagnosis that our current reality is fundamentally diseased, causing a 95% rate of human suffering.
Right, the tears and distress.
And to cure it, the author mechanically dismantles the private sphere. They target traditional marriage to cure selfishness and enforce absolute transparency to cure secretive behavior.
And then, scaling that destruction of boundaries globally. Deploying the UN to force world leaders into foreign regions, theoretically severing the very concept of nationalism and tribalism.
It is a blueprint that demands we tear out the structural support beams of human civilization. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to turn the focus directly over to you, the listener.
Because it really comes down to individual choice.
It does. We have examined the mechanics, the sociology, and the immense contradictions of this text. But ultimately, Shuofeng's proposal presents a deeply intimate trade-off that forces you to define your own core values.
It demands you weigh the value of your individuality against the promise of collective security.
Think about the reality of the author's offer. Would you willingly surrender your personal privacy? Would you sacrifice the exclusive biological loyalties you hold for your spouse and your children?
Would you permanently forfeit your right to vote in local elections, accepting a foreign administrator appointed by an untouchable global committee?
If, and this is an astronomically large if, doing all of those things genuinely guaranteed the absolute eradication of global anxiety, fear, and systemic suffering, what is the specific price you would pay for a perfect, frictionless world?
The author assumes that ending the 95% misery rate is worth absolutely any sacrifice. But I would leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over long after this discussion ends.
Okay, let's hear it.
The entire mechanical foundation of Shuofeng's proposal relies on the assumption that human suffering is a systemic error caused by our social structures.
A glitch in the system.
Exactly. But what if that diagnosis is fundamentally inverted? What happens if humanity actually manages to build this transparent, centrally managed, family-free utopia? Only to discover that anxiety, sorrow, and distress weren't glitches in our societal software at all, but an inescapable, hardwired feature of human consciousness itself.
Man, If we successfully build the perfect, frictionless machine and we are still miserable inside it,
Yeah.
then the problem was never the systems we built.
It was always us.
It was always us. That is a profoundly heavy but vital thought to leave on. Thank you for joining us for this exploration today. Keep questioning the mechanics of the systems around you, keep looking closely at the foundation beneath your feet, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.